Hello, Salado Youth families. Hope that you're doing well wherever you are and whenever you watch this video. Today I'm going to talk about something that you've probably all encountered on the internet. You may hear someone talking about trauma. It's kind of a broad subject right now, a subject that's talked about a lot, people experiencing trauma and how they deal with it. It's even kind of become a meme about when people get triggered, and people are sort of dismissive about people that are triggered by trauma. Which I think is really unfair to people who have actually gone through something traumatic. And we've really all gone through something traumatic. The pandemic, whether we realize it or not, was a traumatic event, a generational event that has changed the way we do all kinds of things. And as much as we want to get back to normality, we've all experienced the trauma of this time, whether it's not being able to see friends or family, or losing a loved one, or having a loved one who's been very ill. We've all been through it. So trauma can affect us in many ways, whether we realize it or not. For example, my grandmother grew up in the Great Depression, the time in the 1920s when the economy tanked and everyone was poor. And so I remember going over to her house when I was a child, and she had a house that would make even a hoarder scared. There was so much stuff everywhere. She kept everything, newspapers, magazines, things that were broken because you might need a part from them someday to fix the thing that you replaced it with. You know, she might have 3 blenders because you might need the parts from the first 2 to fix the third one. She just was used to living in scarcity. And so that applied even though she was 60 years removed from that scarcity. And that's just an example of how trauma can change our behavior in ways that we don't realize, and even in ways that can be unhealthy. Whether we push it down inside and try to repress it and say, nah, it didn't really bother me, probably not the best response to trauma, but some people do that, or whether we've let it take over too much. The point is, we've all experienced it. And in our passage today, in Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah is also experiencing a traumatic time. At the beginning of this passage, it tells you it's in the year that King Uzziah died, which King Uzziah was a great king of Judea. He was a godly king for the most part, but toward the end of his life, he did some things that made God upset, and so did not end his reign on a good note. And as you know, anytime there's transition of leadership, it's kind of a traumatic event. Stuff changes, there's a lot of uncertainty, and so it's in the middle of this really uncertain time when, unlike our society where we kind of know who the next president's going to be at the end of an election, sometimes, they didn't know who the next king was going to be probably at this point. There's a lot of worry about what's going to happen. The enemies of their state were all around them and ready to attack and building more and more power. And in the midst of all of that, Isaiah has this vision of God, the power of God, the majesty of God, filling the temple and the angels attending him, and discussing just how holy and amazing and wonderful God is, that his glory fills the whole earth. Everywhere is filled with God's glory. And his response to this, equally probably traumatic event to see this vision of God, is to realize that he's a sinner, and that not only is he a sinner, but the people he's with are also sinners. His society, his group of friends, maybe the people he's around, are also broken and in need of saving. And God responds with this moment of purification. You can read the passage, it talks about the burning coal touched to his lips, and he's cleansed by this fire. And then he's asked to be sent out into the world to proclaim God's message. Now, what does this mean for us in 2021? I kind of alluded to it earlier. We've all been through some trauma together recently. We've all been through times where it has changed us. And it's in the midst of those times that often God breaks through to us. You see, when everything's going great, I think most human beings think that we did that. It's because of us. Everything is going great. It's great work that I did that gets me my grades. It's my goodness, I guess, that makes my family stay together and everything be wonderful in my life. But when things start to fall apart, we realize just how little control we actually have over anything. None of us had control over COVID becoming a thing. And suddenly it was a thing and everything got turned upside down. We had no control over it. It's in those instances that we realize that God is there for us and God can help us and God has brought us through. And I think that Isaiah wouldn't have been able to really understand the depth of his calling if it hadn't occurred during this traumatic time. He wouldn't have been as open to it, I don't believe, because that's how I've experienced life. I'm sure you could probably say the same. So what does that mean for us going forward? I would say a couple of things. One, if you're a person who hasn't really experienced any bad in your life yet, because you're young and life just hasn't come at you like that yet, be kind to those who have. Be kind to those who are going through traumatic times, because God can work with those. Number two, understand that even though you may not see it as a traumatic time, sometimes you can go through traumatic times and not really realize how they're affecting you. But they do affect you. So learn to recognize that. And number three, if you have been through a traumatic time, realize that we serve a God who wants to make everything turn for good for us. I know that's hard to hear when we're in a time of trauma, when things are not going well, when we're really struggling. But I heard it put this way one time, and it's kind of cheesy, but it stuck with me a little bit. And that was, your mess is your message. The things that you've gone through are the things that you can relate to people about. I have learned recently, over the last few years, to become much more comfortable about my struggles with ADHD as an adult. And I've been really open with that. And I've found that people relate to that. When they are struggling with some sort of mental health issue, whether it's OCD, ADHD, something like that, there's this bond that happens. When we share who we are, people see that we're not perfect and they know that we have something in common. And God has used that in many ways for me to witness to his power to lead me through, to witness to his love, that despite when I mess up things and maybe I forget something I was supposed to do, that God still loves me and God still wants me to be the person I'm supposed to be. So I want to encourage you, if you've been a person that's experienced bad things, it doesn't mean that God doesn't love you. God loves you and wants to work with you and bring you healing and send you out into the world to proclaim his love to others. Hope this word found you blessed. Have a great day.